Hi everybody, Mick here from TRAFFIT. Welcome to another edition of Inside HR. And we have an amazing guest with us today. We have Kasia Tang. Yeah, please introduce yourself for those people that are experiencing you for the first time.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Kasia and I train recruiters. I have worked in sourcing myself for a couple of years in a number of roles that there's a very good saying in Polish that illustrates what happened to me. But basically, let's just say it was a series of unfortunate events in my career, which led me to actually think maybe this is something I could teach others. And I'm now luckily in a position where I work with recruiters every day. I run the biggest Polish community for recruiters. I train recruiters every single day. Yeah, this is what I do.
Kasia, one thing about this video series, which I'm really hoping is, I want to also get founders, CEOs, sales managers, tapping into this kind of content, because I can tell you that 2 months ago, before I joined TRAFFIT, I realized just how much I didn't know about the HR space and the recruiting space. I kind of balled it all into one kind of job, which, and one of the first things when I was very lucky to talk to you in the very beginning, one of the first terms I heard, which I hadn't really heard before, was this term of sourcing. And I didn't realize that, recruitment has, very different ways to obviously solve the problem. It's not just let's post this job post on Indeed or Pracuji.pl and get the recruitment. It's obviously there are so many more ways to tackle it because it's a big problem. And I would love if you could can you kind of just explain what sourcing is, just for the novices in the room, let's say?
I guess actually this is very interesting for everyone. So even sourcers themselves have these active discussions still going on about what sourcing is. I would say talent sourcing is generally, it's all of the activities that allow you to get candidates into the recruitment process. And for me, that is both a separate skill set and actually something that you can do as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, as an expert on any team, because we tend to think it's very, very difficult. But as with everything else, there are different levels to it, and you can certainly do it in any role in the company. It's basically introducing new potential candidates, and it's important to think of them as potential candidates up until the moment that they actually consent to be in the process. So you're introducing potential candidates to the company. And if you think about it from the perspective of someone who works outside of HR, whenever you're referring someone to a company, that's kind of what you're doing, really. So you're using your source, your network, to figure out who could be good for that role. And then you're introducing them to the recruitment team, and they will in turn introduce that person to the hiring manager. So you can actively have a part of that process, even if you're outside of HR.
I mean, the crazy thing for me is like I said, my background is sales, let's say. It's still my real life as well, of course, not to pretend that it's not, but I already started to make these really kind of connections between sales processes and HR recruitment processes. I mean, you have outbound leads and you have, outbound recruitment where you go looking for people. You also have people that come to you, which would be an inbound lead. And I'm like, I suddenly had all this kind of affection for people in HR, because the world thinks that sales is tough and outbound sales and cold calling is really difficult, but I don't see this kind of understanding and appreciation in recruitment. I mean, is that right? Do you see a correlation there?
I definitely think it's very, very similar. And I think it's also similar from the business perspective, because at the end of the day, the source of the deal doesn't matter. The important thing is that you have signed a deal, right? So I think this is also important from the business perspective, whether you've sourced the candidate, whether it's someone you've already known, someone who was referred to the company, or someone who applied to a job ad, doesn't really matter. The point is you have, successfully closed the recruitment process. But I think a lot of the techniques are the same, and we keep having that conversation in HR as well. Is it sales? Is it not sales? Are there,
sure.
is it similar? I guess we're having all of the same problems, including cold calling, which also happens in sourcing, doesn't it? And it's something that people don't really appreciate, I think, in any industry. But there's also that research part, right? So you can actually research someone, and then when you approach them, you kind of know already who they are, or you've made some assumptions, and you can try and concentrate more on their needs. So it's very much, I think in both right now, the consultative approach is very much, and the relationship building is what we would try to go with.
Yeah. So no, I totally get it. And like you said, there are people that do this wrong. There are people that do this right. A lot of it is based down to probably the attention you're giving to the candidate or the potential candidate, showing them why you think they're a good fit or showing them why not, rather than, okay, I'm going to send 1,000 LinkedIn messages today to everybody. And yeah, so, but it's just still, I mean, we're going to move on to this point in a moment, actually. But the one question I would ask is like, do people misunderstand sourcing and what we would always call in the past kind of headhunting? Is there a difference?
Oh.
And what's the exactly, this perception of, oh, you headhunt? No, there's a reason why it has a different name. Like that must be something you've come across, I guess.
There's definitely a reason it has a different name. First of all, there are obvious negative connotations to headhunting, and especially in Polish, it sounds really weird if you translate it into Polish. So we would also use the English version, I guess, of the job title. But the techniques are different. And I guess, if you think about what recruitment used to look like, companies would either advertise or they would go to agencies. And back then, because you weren't able to easily access everyone's data, you would have to actually know people. So as a headhunter, you would have a network of individuals that you would regularly see and call up and, follow their career sort of. And then these were the people that you were able to sell to your clients, right? Whereas now, everything's changed because sourcing is very much dependent on the technologies that we all use. Everyone is somehow, connected to others. So even if they don't have a filled-in LinkedIn profile, they may be on the web somehow, visible somehow to recruiters. And this is what we rely on. So there's much more prep, I guess, before you start talking to someone. And I think this is also where the problems come up, because it's so easy to start sending messages to people. Whereas as a headhunter, I imagine, you really had to value each and every connection because they were so scarce. And now in the time of abundance, we're, I guess, struggling to put that same value to every single connection that we make, but we should.
Has the term headhunter in the recruitment industry become kind of like a negative term, or it's still a positive thing? I mean, is it classed as something where you would go, it's kind of old school? Like, how does it look nowadays, in your opinion?
To be honest, I've always had that feeling like it's old school. And a lot of the people that I talk to that call themselves headhunters are not necessarily headhunters. I wouldn't even necessarily call them sourcers. I think from what candidates have told me, very often they don't really appreciate the term. And it's funny because there's really that, I think they're torn a little bit, because on one hand, they don't seem to like the name, but on the other hand, it would make them very special to have a headhunter contact them.
Yes, I hear it, yes.
Whatever happens, it's good to introduce yourself and actually describe what you do, because I think to most candidates, they're not going to see the difference between a headhunter, a sourcer, or a recruiter. So I never actually told my candidates, hi, I'm a sourcer, even though I used to source in the recruiting space. But even recruiters wouldn't know what that meant back then. And I would just say, hey, I'm responsible for introducing the best people from the market to my recruiting team.
And that's the difference, isn't it? I mean, if I'm being on the outside of the bubble, let's say, if I got someone who came over to me and they had either in their title was headhunter, or they said like, I'm headhunting for this role, for me, I very quickly feel like I have to make a yes/no decision. Like, yes, I'm interested, or please leave me alone. I don't want the preconception. Where it feels like now sourcing is a little bit like, I just want to introduce you to the brand. I want to introduce you to the company. It's not about what happened today. Let's slowly build a relationship, which again, it's so familiar to sales. It's crazy for me, at least. And, we have exactly the same thing where you think about something like a sales development person versus now what is a very common term, which is customer success, where fundamentally they have very similar goals for the company, but we are trying to give a better perception of how we want to do it, let's say.
Yeah.
So, Kasia, it leads me on to my next question, actually, which is, I see that, again, my first thing was like, okay, I see that sales gets a lot of attention in companies. Sales has all these numbers, KPIs, they are talking about conversion rates and so on. And I know from experience, the sales budget is really up there in companies. However, from the first view of recruitment, it doesn't, recruiters and sourcers are not getting the same kind of priority. Now, I've got two questions here. One, kind of, do you agree? And two, have you seen any people who have really done a good job at kind of raising the profile of recruitment inside a company? What can the viewers do to kind of give a little bit more attention to themselves internally?
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I think historically, this is the reason this happened is because of where HR used to be in the company, and it didn't used to be a profit-making department. No one ever saw it that way. But also, it used to be very straightforward. So you would work in HR, and everyone would kind of more or less know what they're doing and how they're going to do it. And now there are different ways of going about building the company culture and the HR department and recruiting people and building an employer brand. But I don't think people necessarily understand just how complicated it is. So when you're hired into the recruiting world, you are going to be told what to do every step of the way. And you learn to be very subservient, and you don't get training. You just get told this is what you have to do. I remember it used to be the same for me. I when I joined my second team in recruiting, I got an approach message from my recruiter, and they said, "This is what you're going to be sending to your candidates." I tried it even. My candidates did not enjoy that message. Let me say it so very quickly. I thought, okay, I need to do it differently. And I think for a lot of people, they are not very proud of what they do because they're learning to just do what they're told. They kind of don't take responsibility for what they do, but also they don't take pride in it. And I think these are the two things that you will see in every department that makes a name for themselves. People are, first of all, they take ownership of what they do, which also means saying no, because this is a word that you don't often hear from recruiters. They often, they often say yeah to everything that hiring managers say and want. But when I look at the same brief that someone else got, and I'm told, okay, this is a tricky one, I can't find anyone, the first thing I do is, why would you ever agree to this? Like, why does someone need 5 years of experience? Why? I mean, because unless you can explain this to me, it's not happening, know? And if you can explain that, it's great, okay? But it gives me more insight into the role. But I need information, I need time, I need money to do my job well. And I think people who don't take ownership don't ask for all of that, but also they're not sure that they can bring the right results. And taking pride in what you do also means that you're not going to be okay doing things halfway. You're not going to just say, okay, let's just post this job ad. It's not great, but let's just post it and let's just see what happens. I always tell people, imagine if you had to sign it with your own name, your job ad. Would you still post it? Because if people know that this is your work, they're going to judge you on it. Would you be happy to be judged on that piece of work? Would you be happy to be judged on how you're treating candidates, etc.? I think the number one thing now we need to do is stand up for the value of HR and actually say, listen, without HR, we don't have anyone in the company and there's no profit. If we're generating profit from what our people do, then that means I'm an instrumental part in generating profit for the company. And therefore, this is what I'm going to need to help you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I knew that this would happen like that. After 2 weeks of working in the space, you suddenly feel it. But the good thing for me is I remember how it was 2 weeks before I joined the space and how little I knew. But the good news was it was so easy to get on board. It was so easy to quickly understand. But I think for me as well, I think and I've spoke to a lot of people in the HR space as well. And I think one thing that unfortunately, my sales brain says, let's grab some numbers. And I still think that that's a lot of people in HR are building confidence, but they still don't feel comfortable like talking about return on investment and talking about, well, hey, listen, if it takes us 4 more weeks to hire this sales manager, the potential loss for the company is X amount of thousands of pounds or euros or whatever. I mean, I think that is the culture shock. I mean, I'm saying to these people, you're doing what salespeople do. You're performing the same kind of skill sets that salespeople do, but salespeople are just more comfortable talking about the numbers. And maybe because they're more obvious, but it's still something HR could do, I think.
I agree. And I think it's very intimidating. And we kind of think like, oh, but I don't know about the numbers. And what I've learned in running my business is no one really knows more than I do, but they can pretend they know more.
Yes.
And because I have a very serious imposter syndrome, I think a lot of people in HR do. But if I keep thinking, okay, anyone else would charge the same amount for less and they would be fine with it. I'm the only one who knows what's happening in my head. Mm-hmm. Just don't show that you're insecure to your hiring manager, because really what you're supposed to give them is a sense of you're supposed to make them feel comfortable. You're supposed to make them feel like everything is going to be okay. And you can't do that unless you're confident enough. And I think very often in most companies, what you could do is actually work with the sales team to generate the numbers that you need, especially in outsourcing. Whenever people would tell me, oh, but I don't know who I'm going to hire, I would also always say, okay, are you sitting in with the sales team on their meetings? No. I'm like, okay, but they know what projects they're selling. They know who has to come on board to deliver those projects. They know how likely the sales are, and they know exactly how much you're going to generate in profit for your company if this happens. So if you knew all of that, then you could just use the same numbers for your recruiting strategy, couldn't you? Yep. And all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, actually someone knows this.
Yeah.
And I think all that knowledge, right?
Yeah, they really do, and I've seen it. And again, I think to myself, if none of my HR partners in the past in previous companies ever came to me and said, Mick, did you notice that this time you only had to interview 3 candidates to find the right person? Did you remember that last time we had to do 12? Now, no one's ever explained it to me in that basic logic of, wow, yeah, how did you do that? And that kind of, unfortunately, that is the way I believe, or it seems like, I think that's the key to getting people outside HR to understand, by just saying, did you realize that we hired this person in half the time as the last one? Let me explain how I did that. Now I need some budget to make sure we do that every time, etc. So, and
then the teams that I've seen work very successfully with everyone in the company, they would typically have one hiring manager that they get along with just fine, and they would take that as a case to everyone else and say, listen, we need 40 hours of your time for just one recruiting process, which is crazy because with Mick it only takes 10 hours and he hires the perfect person. Do you want to have the same results? Here's what we do. And trust me this one time, and then you're going to see the results for yourself. And
it's logical. It's just logical, but it's all about the how you say it and how you communicate the message. Going to a CEO and saying, I need money because it's hard to hire. They can't compare. They can't make logic from it, even though it's true. So I totally agree. So, Kasia, first of all, this is great. I think it's really valuable. And I think that people should definitely be following yourself and following your content, because this is key. You're already doing the hard work. Where your job is getting harder is just the communication and the type of communication. But Kasia, one thing I think I asked before we jumped on this, and I'm going to wrap it up with this one, is can you think of like 2 or 3 things that people could really start to do tomorrow, either whether or not it's related to sourcing or whether or not it's related to that internal process of getting more attention or more priority? Like, what are the easy things that people normally are not doing that they can do tomorrow?
Right. So I would say the first thing that you want to do is have a support group and join any community where you're getting that, because what you really need to understand, I think the biggest value people get from me is when they see me source and they go, oh, but I do the same thing. Exactly. There's no magic answer. And it's, you need to work on your confidence by knowing everyone else is in the same situation. So that's number one. Number two is work with your team. Actually, and I think with COVID, it's a paradox, but maybe it's easier to have, the entire team on a call once a week, once every 2 weeks, but everyone should know everyone else and they should work with each other. Everyone should know exactly what's happening in the company. And for that, you also need number three, talking to other teams. And I think it's very important because, like we said, you can get so much from talking to sales, you can get so much from talking to marketing. And if you insist on being present at the important meetings, but really being present, don't just, join and then mute yourself and do something else while you're on the meeting, but actually join, listen, and try and understand the big picture of what's happening in the company and how you're supporting that. So don't just think, oh, okay, I'm hiring for that person, but really think I'm building this company. And if you think about it that way, then really it's the most important job that there is. And you really need to know exactly everything that's going on in the company.
Kasia, what a perfect way to kind of wrap up our quick fire conversation today. I've got the last question. Where can people follow you? Where can people kind of get in touch with you? What's the best way for people to find out more?
Right. So I have my own blog at kasiatang.com. So that should be fairly easy. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I like to run active discussions there, on Twitter, on Instagram for more of a, hobby related activity. Anyway, you can find me online. I'm sure there's lots of sources.
Sure. We will post some links in the comments as well and in the description for the video. So Kasia, thank you so much for your time today. Super valuable. I really am sure that people have things that they will think twice about now and they will go away tomorrow and do a little bit different. So thanks so much for your time, Kasia, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thanks for having me.